En este video me va a estar acompañando Matt, anfitrión del Go Big Redcast, el cual es un juego de palabras de la porra icónica de mis Huskers, a quien sigue a través de este podcast. No solo esto, pero en su día a día se dedica a trabajar para la fundación de la Universidad de Nebraska Lincoln. Es decir, vende la vibra de la universidad a donadores todo el tiempo. Algo de lo más bonito que he experimentado en Estados Unidos es la cultura que tienen alrededor de los deportes colegiales. Entonces no pude pensar en mejor persona para ser un invitado y conversar un poquito más de college football. So Matt, like I said, thank you for being here. Yeah, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Heck yeah, man. This will be fun.
Yes, I'm excited. So would love for you to start talking about, the lifetime of Husker memories and being part of this city.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been a Husker fan my entire life. I mean, I very first season I ever started following the Huskers was 1983. And it's a pretty good year to start. Nebraska was #1 from start to finish. They had the Heisman winner, they had the Outland, the Lombardi winner, the #1 and #2 pick in the draft, the #1 pick in the USFL draft. And I kind of got probably a little spoiled there thinking like this is what it's going to be like every single year. Quite honestly, under Coach Osborne, all the way through my college years of the 90s, it kind of was like that. It wasn't always that extreme, but we were always top 10, top 15. And then by the end of it, his last 5 seasons, Nebraska goes 60-3. The dynasty, I was in school for that. We only had 1 home loss my entire 5 years on campus. So, it was a pretty magical time. And once you get that into the system, it's hard to get that out. Even some losing years and everything since. Right. It's been that fandom will never leave.
Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, we have the record, obviously, but how many games have we sold out that stadium for?
Well, so I think it's over 400 now. It would have started in Bob Devaney's first season, 1962. I think it was against Missouri. So it was like game 5 or 6. It took the fans a couple of games to buy into Devaney, and once they did, man, that was it. He was they've sold it out ever since.
Yeah, I mean, we're going into almost 80 years of selling that stadium out. That's insane.
Yeah, it's crazy here. And just even where you live here, just off of campus, I mean, this area, you get to a college football Saturday and you see the sea of red just walking down the street here. They'll walk down those trails. They just take over Lincoln. Memorial Stadium, the joke is it's the 3rd largest city in Lincoln or in the state of Nebraska when it's full. And that's the case. I mean, the fans here, there's no other pro team in Nebraska. There's no other major Division I football program in Nebraska. So every ounce of energy towards college football in this state gets directed towards the Cornhuskers. And for good and bad and everything in between. Yep. But I mean, my goodness.
Loyal fan base.
They love their Huskers. We love our Huskers here in Nebraska.
Yeah, I was so disappointed. So 2020 was my freshman year. And obviously because of the COVID and all that happened, I couldn't go to the games. No, I won't say it was the whole season we couldn't go to the games, right?
Correct, yeah. Yep. Mac on the Redcast with me. Mac and we went to the Illinois game that kicked off the 21 season in Champaign. Yep. Hotter than blazes, like 105 degrees outside and everything. But it was the first game post-COVID. So they allowed like 20,000 in the stands. It was about half full, and they had capped it. But it was just the fact that we got to be back in the stadium for another game, which was so cool to be there. And then, of course, the game didn't go well. But that's beyond the point.
That's another story.
That's beyond the point. Sometimes it's the beauty of being a fan, too, is it's the experiences that win or loss, the experiences and doing things like that, going and seeing places, being with friends. I mean, that's as impactful as what happens on the field sometimes.
Yeah, that's fair. I would love your perspective on that, though. So you have teams like Alabama right now, you lose Saban, him being there, I don't know how many years and how successful he was. And obviously we had Tom Osborne step away, and no disrespect to the coaches, right? Like we haven't been as successful as we were then. Yep. I think Coach Rule is doing an amazing job right now, though. But what do you think is the biggest switch, especially in culture, from a Tom Osborne-led team to what it has been ever since?
Yeah, I've said it for as long as we've been doing the Redcast. Go back 20 years, go back in the middle of the 2000s. If I just said who were the top programs in the country right then, it was Florida, it was Texas, and it was USC. And it'd be real easy to say, well, but they're all from, they'll never be bad. They're from the biggest recruiting hotbeds of Southern California, of Florida, of Texas. They'll be good forever. And when Florida loses Urban Meyer, when Pete Carroll leaves USC, when Mac Brown, leaves Texas, it has taken all of those schools a decade or two, and they're not necessarily back to where they were before that. And so even at Nebraska, where we have certain advantages and disadvantages. A disadvantage would be we don't have the mountains and we don't have millions of people living here.
And we're not in the coast.
Yeah, we're not on the coast, right? But we have other advantages. This fandom, the support that we have, the facilities here. I mean, everything. There's a lot of great things that we have going here. But at the end of the day, great coaches. The thing I've come to an absolute conclusion on: great coaches are the difference. And I said this on our show for years leading up to Saban leaving. And when he did, it's good luck being the person replacing him, because if you go 11-2, that's not treated the same way at Alabama right now as it would be at Nebraska.
Yep.
And we can understand that. Nebraska fans can understand that as well as anyone, because in 1996, my sophomore year, when we went 11-2, in the middle of going 60-3, in the middle of, there were 4 other undefeated regular seasons that happened that year, or during that dynasty. When we went 11-2, something was wrong. Yeah. We lost a game to Arizona State early in the season. We lost 19-0 with a bunch. We were replacing everybody from the championship season the year before, and we lose 19-0. Now that Arizona State team ends up being about one drive away from winning the national championship themselves. They were very good. They were a very good team. But we looked at it as, what is wrong? We fire this guy, get rid of this player, get rid of this player. And it kind of started to build, I think, within the guys that do the podcast with me, a little different approach. And I was one of those guys who fire this guy, get rid of this guy. And that's not a building approach. You're never going to be a great long-term program. I don't care what level you are, if that's the approach that you take. And what I hope is happening with Nebraska right now, with Coach Rule being there and Troy Dannon as the athletic directors, I hope we're building something that's long-term, that's sustainable, that these people are, and it's hard to do right now in the transfer portal world. I mean, think about what 2% football is about. It's about developing players and scouting and all that. It's this development, this concept of development that gets completely lost when you are starting over year after year with your team and everything. And so hopefully, I think what I see with Coach Rule is, he has the approach still of wanting to do a long-term developmental kind of program. It's hard to do in today's world, but I think he's doing it as well as any of the coaches I'm seeing.
100%. I think it's super interesting because of a couple of reasons. We can talk about USC, right? 2000s, Reggie Bush, all that thing. But at least to me, it feels like the fan base was not as strong for the past 10, 12 years. I think Lincoln Riley brought some hype into it, and now it's a little weird, whatever. But Nebraska is as loyal as it gets, even through the whole peaks and valleys of this new generation of football fans. Why do you think we have that special secret sauce when it comes to Penguin?
I think some of it's the setup, like, LA versus here. LA, you have millions and millions more people, but you also have a lot of different things going on. There are a lot of different loyalties. You have UCLA, right across town too. The passion here is all dedicated towards one school. But I 100% agree with you. I thought about this back when I was in college and we were winning national titles. And we'd pat ourselves on the back and say what great fans we are, and look at the sellout streak that at that point had been going on for 35 years at that time. And I remember thinking, well, but are we really that great of fans? We're winning championships all the time, so maybe it's just because of that. I mean, what if we weren't good? And 25, 30 years later, it got tested. And I'm more proud of the fan base today than I probably have ever been, because they have, to your point, they show up and they've stuck it out through a lot of seasons where other fan bases wouldn't have. I also think it's the reason that we will always be relevant, and the blue blood that Nebraska is in college football. It's won a lot of games and everything, but the blue blood is that this fan base will never let this thing die. I mean, I want Coach Rule to be the next Saban, and yet if he goes out and has several losing seasons, we will do the thing that I said earlier I don't want us to have to do. I don't want us to start over. But this fan base they won't let this program die. They will continue to go until we find the next person. You know, history kind of repeats itself. If you go back in Husker history, there was a stretch from 1941 and the World War II all the way until when Devaney got here, that Nebraska went through 7, 8, 9 coaches. And when Devaney did get here, you know, people weren't on board right away. Some people thought they wanted someone else. You know, Devaney's coming from Wyoming. That's not a big time get. But once he got things rolling here, you know, obviously the fan base got completely behind him. But the point was, if it wouldn't have been him, it's the love-hate I have sometimes with Husker Nation. Even like in 1968, Devaney gets us turned around. We start winning games, and then he has 2 seasons where we went 6-4, not losing seasons, 6-4. Yeah. And at the end of the 68 season, there were fans in Omaha that signed a petition to get rid of Devaney. And Osborne had times during his career too where fans weren't happy. We lost Oklahoma too many times, or you know, we lost 7 bowl games in a row. Granted, they were to Miami and Florida State, usually down in the Orange Bowl. And so I love that about Husker fans, that we're maniacal and we want to be great. We want to be number one. But sometimes it's also, you know, taking that approach too of, well, did we get better? You know, that longer term approach. What we're in right now. Nebraska just went to a bowl game for the first time in 8 seasons. Yep. It wasn't a great year. We went 7-6. Nobody.
But we'll take the progress right now.
We'll take like crazy. Yeah. We'll take the progress. And this has been an interesting program to watch here.
I think striking the balance is what makes it so tough. Mm-hmm. So obviously in college, Husker fan, but NFL, I'm a Steelers fan. So the standard is the standard. It's the same thing. We want perfection. We want the Super Bowls. You know, we have 6, so we want more. And you have Tomlin, who has been a staple for us. He's the longest tenured coach in all major sports in the U.S. right now at 19 years, I want to say. He continuously wins. He continuously gets you to the playoffs. But since we lost Ben and, you know, some core pieces, we haven't been able to win playoffs. Mm-hmm. So now you're there wondering, okay, do we just have a losing season and try to draft better? The NFL is different than college, right? Mm-hmm. But then you go and strive for that. Let's just go win a Super Bowl. Or, hey, you could be the Cleveland Browns or the New York Giants, who every 2 years you're doing a rebuild. Yeah. So how do you strike that balance of, hey, we have to push the envelope to go win, while also at the same time, you have to be consistent enough to allow a program to grow?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think every program, pro, college, high school, everyone has their secret sauce. What makes it work for you where you're at? Nebraska, we have our secret sauce. USC has theirs. Right. When I think of Pittsburgh and I think of the Steelers, I think of consistency. I think they've had 3 head coaches in 50, 60 years, and they have a very stable ownership group, the Rooneys, that, I mean, they're not going to panic, you know, and that consistency is what has led them to be so good for so long. But anytime you have greatness within your program, that just creates higher standards afterwards. Yep. So New England was one of the absolute worst programs in the NFL up until 2000. Yeah. And all of a sudden, they have just had this meteoric rise over the last 25 years, basically with 1 head coach and 1 quarterback. And it has reset expectations forever. Yeah. Now that head coach.
And for the rest of the league too.
For the league too. Yeah. That head coach isn't there anymore. That quarterback isn't there anymore.
That looks different.
But those expectations are still there. And that will be interesting to watch how that plays out, you know, over the next 5 and 10 and 15 years. Are they able to get back to that level? And when I say back to that level, just being a consistent playoff team, not just winning Super Bowls. I've always thought that with Nebraska. I'll hear people say, well, Nebraska will never get back to where they were back in the Osborne era or whatever. And I'll ask those people, I'm like, well, just specify, what do you mean by we won't get back? Do you mean we won't get back to 60-3 over 5 seasons with 4 undefeated years? And right. Maybe we won't get back to playing for 4 national championships in 5 years. That's a pretty crazy standard to hold to anybody.
Yep. Even if Osborne was back here doing his prime, doing his thing.
Yeah. Yes. Nick Saban didn't do that.
Right.
You know, and so do I think Nebraska is going to get back to being 60-3 over 5 years? Probably not. I'll never say never to anything, but probably not. But can Nebraska get back to being a consistent top 20 program, one that is competing every single November to win the the conference, competing to get into the college football playoff, which now it's a different world too.
Right, it's 12 teams.
Yeah,
we might get 16 by next time we have this conversation.
Yeah, you had to be 11-1 or 12-0 to win the national championship back in Osborne's era. Today, you can be 9-3 or 10-2, get into the playoff, and you got a shot. And so it creates different opportunities too that didn't exist back then. But the one thing that we know is and this happens in all levels of football, all levels of sport, is that change is inevitable. It's constant.
Yep.
And the schools and the coaches and the programs that adjust to that change the best are going to be the ones that will always be successful. If you fight it, I think it was our athletic director, Troy Dannon, he looks at the national championship trophies that Nebraska had. We have 5 of them. And he looks at them all and he goes, these are great. I mean, these are awesome trophies. We're not trying to win that trophy again, because that trophy, what it took to win that one, isn't the same thing that what it takes to win the one now. And I thought it was a great way of like honoring the past, but saying what we have to do now looks different than what we did then.
That conversation intrigues me. Going back to the Steelers just for a second.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we just had the draft and whatever, first round. I was hoping for a quarterback. Like I was genuinely hoping for a quarterback. I think a lot of people were hoping for a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
But the Roonies don't budge. They won't feel the pressure. What do we draft? A defensive lineman, because that is just what we do. We play defense, I think in the same way, a couple of years ago when Rule got here, everyone was hating on, I think we had a couple of games where we had Harburg at quarterback, under center, doing the speed option. And I was like, one, as someone who doesn't like that type of offense, at least not anymore, yeah, go against that. But also, this is Nebraska. It just makes sense that we're running the speed option, or it makes sense that you're running the triple option. Kind of same way I'm trying to compare it to the Steelers, where by tradition, this is what you do. Now, you know that it gets you to a certain point. Will that in 2025 or whatever year it is, get you to the next level though? And I think that, again, going back to that balance is where you have to put it on the scale and be like, okay, we know this provides constant success, but will that give us enough to get to the championships? So the NBA playoffs are happening right now. That's a best of 7 series. At the end of the day, unless injury happens, I think the best team tends to win. Championship pedigree, great coaching, great adjustments, and the biggest playmakers making the biggest plays, and that's it. But we've seen Nick Foles and Philly win in the Super Bowl against the Tom Brady and the Patriots just because that day they were better.
Yeah.
So yeah, back in the day, you needed 12 wins, 13 wins to win the national championship. But the beautiful thing about football, specifically how it's set up both in the NFL and college, if you get in the dance, you can win it all. As long as you have a great day, you prepared well, you made a splash play that they didn't expect, that can change the whole outcome of the game and probably the season. So opening that conversation of the N.I.L. and how much are players worth today, Reggie Bush was a great example, right? And I think that's why Pete Carroll left, and now why Nick Saban wants no part of this. Where do you think this is going?
Well, whether this goes back to you adjust to change or you don't adapt to change, and what happens, whether you like NIL, whether you don't, whether you like the portal or don't. And I have my own personal feelings on all of these things.
Right.
The cat's out of the bag and the stuff isn't necessarily going to go back. Now, there might be some changes with how it looks. There might be some rules and some long needed rules about how it will work, but it's out. So now it's going to happen. And I think it's really important. So value is an interesting topic, because think of even like Shedeur Sanders last week or 2 weeks ago in the draft. Some people placed a very high value on him. And for whatever reason, 32 teams put the value of him to the 5th round.
Right.
Somewhere his value changed between some of the expectations going into it, the prognostications, and then what actually happened. He's a good example. And I think when we look at recruiting and NIL, the value is not on the player, in my opinion. It's on what the player can bring to your program. And that's for each coach, each staff to be able to identify. And I don't expect 2 coaches to look at the same player and give that same value.
Right.
So that player has 4 stars or 5 stars or whatever value is placed on them by some recruiting service. But at the end of the day, the coaching staffs have to look at them and go, well, how do I think they're going to adjust to what we do? How are they going to adapt to our culture here? playing in Lincoln, Nebraska is very different than playing at USC in LA. So how are you going to adjust to that? I mean, I think about that I love your story. You came here from Cancun. I mean, what kind of an adjustment to speak to that?
Right.
You're a 5-star football player and you're coming to Lincoln, Nebraska from Cancun. What does that adjustment look like?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think using Shadur as an example, Dion is a brilliant marketing guy. I think he's a great coach. Obviously, he was one of the greatest corners and the players of all time, regardless of sport, really. Mm-hmm. But the way he manufactured this buzz around Colorado is insane. I don't think we've ever seen that where within a year or two, you flip the whole narrative. Now you have people coming to the university, regardless of if they're athletes or not. So if I want eyeballs on my program, I want Shadur Sanders. But if I want the best player for my system, right? Or I run a totally different offense, or my culture is all about being humble and showing up and being the first one in, last one out, I probably don't want him. So I understand on the NFL perspective, but bringing it back to college, yes, it's a matter of perspective because 247 can tell me you're a 5-star recruit, but what does that mean? And I think that's where the subjectivity is so, I don't know, there's such a big gap of what I think versus what you think, that the star system is flawed in a way.
Yes. We've had on our show a number of times, we've had Brett Ciancia, and he's a Pick Six Previews is his publication. He Heisman voter and all that. And he has a great piece in his magazine that comes out each year. It talks about like I'm trying to think exactly what it's called, but basically he rates development of players and then what programs are overdeveloping and underdeveloping players essentially.
Yep.
And there's kind of two ways to look at it. One of it is, we'll use Nebraska. It's probably not going to shock people to realize that over the last 10 years, we underdeveloped, meaning we've recruited really well. A lot of those 4-star players, even some 5-star guys, we've recruited at a high level. And then on the back end of it, how many of those guys end up getting drafted? Right now, we're in a bad spot with that. We haven't been getting a lot of guys drafted. So highly rated players come in and lose a bunch we lose a bunch of games for 4 years, 5 years, and then the results
not great. Yeah,
not great. That's what Coach Rule is turning around right now. Right. A school like Iowa, our hated rivals, across the river to the east, they have traditionally recruited pretty low classes, but developed guys over 3, 4, 5 years, and then they've turned out some pretty good pros, and so they rank high in that ranking in the Pick Six Previews. I just think that it's about finding the right guys. What Iowa's done is they've found guys that fit the mold of what an Iowa player is going to look like. Cooper DeJean and everything, and then he goes on to have a great career there, and now he's doing well with the Eagles. They're not necessarily it's not winning them national titles.
Yeah,
I want to be very clear there because I always want to throw a little shade towards Iowa too. Yeah. But they're not winning national titles with that. But they've been very consistent, and they know how to get players that fit that system. I think of when we talked about Shadur Sanders, and I think about the Steelers. That's a great example of I could see the Steelers are not a program that
it would mesh well.
It wouldn't mesh well. We don't need that distraction.
Yeah.
We don't need him to bring eyeballs to our screen.
Yeah.
We're Pittsburgh.
Right. We have those.
We have those.
Yeah.
Our fans are going to show up whether he's on the field or not.
Or anyone else, yeah.
But actually thinking where he ended up at, the Browns, you know what? I mean, they took 2 quarterbacks in a couple of rounds. They're begging for eyeballs, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you bring Iowa, and I'll get back to that. The Shadur Sanders, super interesting. I was having this conversation with a friend, and he told me why do you think Johnny Manziel and Baker Mayfield got drafted on the first round when they were cocky and arrogant as well, and Shadur got drafted all the way to the 5th? And I was like, look, I have no idea, but I'll tell you what, guess who picked all of them? The Browns. Yeah. So hey, there's something there. There's something there. Anyway, coming back to Iowa.
That's a real good point.
I think, and like you said, they're not winning championships, right? But we do have a certain track record with them where they produce great tight ends. Mm-hmm. And we can say that Iowa's probably tighter than you right now. And I can talk about wide receiver you with Ohio State Clemson was like that for a second there. I don't know if we have that in Nebraska, where we have a certain position group that we know, or you know as an NFL scout, that if you go to Nebraska and you pick that guy who's a linebacker or safety or quarterback, whatever, is a guaranteed starter maybe later on, because we don't develop something specific. I'm not saying you have to be great at everything.
Sure.
But they for sure know and have that secret sauce, like you mentioned, on that specific position.
Well, I'll tell you what Nebraska needs to be known for, and this is what it was for many, many years, is it needs to win the trenches. Offensive line, defensive line. To this day, Nebraska still has the most Outland awards of any program. Most All-Americans of any offensive lineman still come from this school, and we haven't had an All-American in a number of years. And we still have that #1 ranking, and that's because we had that for so many years, so consistent. That's what Nebraska, at the end of the day, whether we're a run team, a pass team, an option team, or whatever, you have to have some kind of identity. I think Iowa found that with tight ends. Coach Osborne, like you talked about, like the speed option. And when we did it a couple of years ago, I loved it because I knew we weren't going to see it for long. We kind of had about a 1 year where we got to see some of the old triple and speed option come back, knowing that wasn't going to exist long. But that was the identity that we were going to create. And it wasn't going to create pro quarterbacks. You know, Tommy Frazier is one of the greatest quarterbacks in college football history, and he wasn't even a 50% career completion guy here. I mean, that wasn't going to translate to the pros, but it translated to him going 33-3 over his starts here at Nebraska. So whatever it is, find your identity. And at Nebraska, with the offensive line, we need to get back to being that. We need to have, when guys are getting drafted, and we said we need to get guys drafted, we need to get some offensive linemen drafted. As you get your offensive line better and you're building in the trenches, the D line should come along with that. And we've got a great history of D linemen that come well before Ndamukong Suh graduated here too, and he was pretty good. So we've got to win in the trenches, and if you do that, at the end of the day, football, through all the changes, and we've had safety changes, and there's pads on helmets in practice, and all those things. All those changes that have happened. At the end of the day, it still is a Spartan sport. It still 100%. Is the most physical team still wins, or has a great shot of winning. It could being more physical than your opponent. When you have a big talent gap between two schools, it can make a big difference. It can negate some of that talent gap. If Nebraska is playing somebody look at Ohio State last year.
Yeah.
That team is so much more talented than Nebraska.
Yeah.
And yet Nebraska defensively was just flat out more physical. They tackled well, and they took that team down to the final seconds of that game. And really, we had multiple opportunities to win that game. And the point is, it had nothing. It wasn't a talent thing at that point. It was, Nebraska. Our guys bought into it, and I think, especially in today's day and age, this goes back to like N.I.L. and how do you get a value on a player. Coach Rule is going to look at a player, and if that guy doesn't value buying into the system, value the physical part. Coach Rules, these are the most physical practices you're going to see in football today, are being done just a few blocks over here. If some player doesn't buy into that, I can tell you what his value is to Coach Rule then.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what your NIL value is.
Just looking at it from a coach perspective, I think controlling the line of scrimmage negates or minimizes the need for scheming things so much. So Jeremiah Smith, right? So number 4 for Ohio State, great receiver. I think he dominated throughout the playoffs. But you could tell the OC, Chip Kelly, which I admire Chip Kelly, he was scheming plays for him, right? But when you have a great O-line, it can come down to exactly what I'm running. I'm not trying to outsmart you. I'm not trying to out-scheme you. I'm not trying to gain numbers in the book. Like, no. I'm running power, or I'm running counter, or whatever. I'm just running it up here.
Yep.
But if we just happen to be better than you, and not even just talent-wise, like it's not just, we're bigger. No, we know how to block every front. Or we know exactly where we're placing our hands on this specific situation. Now that changes the whole complexity of the game. Because you might know through scout, they run this 70% of the time, maybe. But if you can't stop me, it doesn't really matter.
I 100% agree with everything you just said there. We've probably the greatest line that offense line Nebraska's ever had, 94. We had the pipeline, the original pipeline. And those guys, Zach Wiegert wins the Outland, and Zaska and Aaron Graham and Brendan Stye. Geez, Brendan Stye had a nice career there with the Steelers. Those guys Joel Wilkes was the one walk-on guy that found his way onto that lineup. But those guys had played for years together, and they developed, and they got, they came in here as athletic 250-pound linemen coming out of high school, and by the time they're done here, they're in their 300s, and they've played a lot of games, and they communicated so well with each other. And it was that combination of brawn. I mean, Zach Wiegert, there's stories that he would just tell the defense, "Hey, we're running here again. We're just going to run right here." To your point, stop
Do
it.
something about
and
it.
They just couldn't stop it. That there's a beauty to that too. Like sometimes I think Osborne didn't get the credit for the scheming piece of it because we just ran guys over, but that was very much by design. And if you can have that, if you can have the brawn and the beef, but also that those guys have worked with each other for so long, this is the challenge I see in the transfer portal world. Like, we just brought in 2 offensive linemen, Spindler from Notre Dame is, playing in the national championship game, and then Pritchett from Alabama. So a big tackle. They could be very good players for us. I hope they are. But it's not just plug and play on the line. Yeah. You guys have to work together. Now you're playing a 3-man line. Now it's a 4-man line. There's more fronts than we've ever seen before. There's more challenging defenses. How well do they communicate with each other and on the fly? Because we've seen it countless times in games. Somebody misses one assignment. Guy gets, I don't care how good you are, you miss that assignment and the guy goes through. Yeah, who cares how good your running back is? If guys are coming in unblocked, he's probably not going to have a real successful play.
I'm thankful that you bring that up, because for me, I think it comes down to 2 things, like 1, culture and familiarity. 1, when it comes to culture, playing in Mexico, 1, football does exist in Mexico, right? But 2, I think it was very different when I got here, not in the football sense of the word or schematics or whatever. I really enjoy seeing for the first time on a Friday, giving my jersey to someone else and seeing the whole high school wearing home and away jersey. We didn't have that back home, right? And I think you go to the college level and that's that, but to the extreme. And we have manufactured, whether we want to admit it or not, rivalries to make those games even more meaningful and have a trophy on that. And now you have everyone behind it. So if I just transferred here my junior year, I don't get the meaning of an Iowa-Nebraska game.
Yeah.
So culture-wise, I think that's the glue that gets the team together. And 2, this doesn't surprise me one bit when you go and talk about a Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. The best duos in the NFL, it's not a secret. They played together in college. There's a sense of familiarity. It can be. I know Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow are amazing as players individually, but I can assure you can put, not Justin Jefferson because he played with him too, AJ Brown with Joe Burrow, and he might not be as successful because he doesn't have years and years and years of reps with him. So if you have a kid who has been together with each other like all linemen, we were all walk-ons, but we played together for 4 years. I can assure you, by the time they're seniors, I know every call. I know where we're sliding, I know you and you know me. That part of familiarity, I think, is hurting teams because they don't have it.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I think it was the Texans this year. Don't quote me on that, but I think they were the one that took 2 Iowa State receivers in the draft. If it wasn't, there's a team that took 2 Iowa State receivers.
I'm trying to think of who.
And for some reason, I think it's the Texans. Anyways, I'm almost surprised you don't see that more often. Yeah. Like it was so rare that it was the idea that, oh wow, this team went out and took 2 guys from the same position group from the same school. But I'm like, back to that point of like, guys, the familiarity, if you've worked together, you see it all the time in college now with the transfer portal. What did Nebraska just do? We just hired a wide receiver coach who just came from Kentucky. Why? Because he had familiarity working with Dana Holgerson, our now offensive coordinator. He worked with him at Houston. So we brought in a coach who had familiarity with who
and coaches do that all the time.
They do it all the time. So then what did we end up doing with the wide receiver room? We brought in a couple of receivers from Kentucky. Now, one of them's a young guy and he's already gone. So I'm not sure what, I don't know. It's not 100%, works every time. But the other guy, Dane Key, he was the top receiver from Kentucky last year. And he's the guy that he's already being talked about as a leader on the team and somebody that's going to step into that top receiver role. And guess what? He knows exactly what's expected from his position coach. And his position coach has worked with the OC, and just having that kind of familiarity. You have to, I guess, in this world of transfer portal and guys coming in and out, like Coach Osborne had the same staff, most of the same guys for 25 years. With that not being the case anymore, it's so rare to see that kind of
stuff. Yeah.
It's just so tough now. Now you have to kind of manufacture some of that experience with each other. So if you're hiring that coach, then maybe that coach needs a coach or two that he's worked with. And now they have larger coaching staffs on top of that, so they can do that. Now, if you're going to be able to do a portal, then let's bring a player or two that you've coached with before. You have to manufacture some of that while still trying to create a team around them too of guys that can work together.
100%. And I'm not trying to crown my Steelers here. We have a lot of things that we need to work on. But one thing I do like that Tomlin has done in the last couple of years, he tries to get either sons of the Steelers legends. So Joey Porter Jr., right? Joey Porter played for the Steelers. Now you bring in Joey Porter Jr. He knows the culture. He knows the standard, Or genuinely puts brothers in the same locker room. So Cam Hayward has his little brother, Connor, in the same locker room. Yeah, you're picking them because they're good players. But now they're even more invested. Like that's their literal blood in that same locker room. You know that's not going to be an issue. So I wonder if we're going to start getting that, because I know Raiola has a younger brother and would love to see that happen here. I wonder if we're going to start seeing more of that, where since we can't have people together for 4 years, maybe playing with your brother might incentivize you to stay together for 2 or 3-ish years. I don't know.
That's very true. You try to find as many reasons to incentivize people coming there and as many reasons for them to stay there, and also for as many reasons for them to give it their all. And I guess that, and the point behind that is like what you said, when someone transfers from some other school and they don't understand the rivalry between two teams. Think about that. It's not just a Nebraska thing. It's
everyone has one.
Yeah, if you're playing for the Cowboys and you don't understand the rivalry that they have with the Eagles, and then you go play at Eagle Stadium, that's an eye opener, right? And that affects how so having that understanding of that is important. And we've always said it in Nebraska how important it was to recruit in-state kids. That goes back to the Bob Devaney era here, that we were going to get the best kids from this state. We're going to put a fence around the state and say, no one's going to come in and take our kids. And it wasn't because they were highly rated. There weren't a lot of 4 and 5 stars coming out of Nebraska, but we're going to get the best kids from here. And then when they come here, man, they play so hard.
They're proud to be.
They're so proud to be Huskers. And so Nebraska at its best is we get the best in-state kids, and then we want to go out all around we're a national recruiting team. A lot of schools are now, but we were really one of the first ones where we were a national team. We would go into California, we'd go into Florida, we'd go down into Texas and everywhere in between. And that was our secret sauce. Now, for Coach Osborne and for anyone that works for him, that's hard. If you're going to work for Coach Osborne, if you were going to be successful in that kind of era, you're being asked to do a lot of things that the guy that works at USC that can, steps out the front door and falls over 10 5-stars in a 3-block radius. They don't have to work the same way. And I'm not saying they didn't have to work hard, but they didn't have to work the same way that our coaches did. And so that all comes back to understanding a place too, and what is needed to be good.
And kind of mimicking that NFL model, at some point, I assume we're going to get GMs. And we're starting to see that already. Yeah. But we're going to start to notice GMs who know how to take care of the money aspect, because it was not part of the equation, right? And now that it is, even in the place that has been for so many years, you have a Howie Roseman with the Eagles, who absolutely is a wizard with the salary cap and, moving money around to keep the stars together and who's getting let go and who's not, and building the trenches and all that. At the college level, we're going to start noticing some GMs who just happen to have a better understanding of how to leverage the money aspect to bring the best talent, to keep the talent around the team. and maybe even to keep a coaching staff, because that's also a hard part.
Yeah. The challenges right now, we had Coach Osborne on our podcast a few years back, and we asked him, we started talking about the portal, and we talked about N.I.L with him. And the very first question we asked is, how would you navigate this in today's world? And his response was, I'm glad I don't have to. There are so many things. Again, this is irregardless if people like the direction or don't like the direction. It's just there are so many things that you have to account for today that I can understand why having larger coaching staffs it would come in helpful. Yeah. There's just so much from roster management, coaching staff management. Now you have literally the cost of what it means to run a team. And that starts to come in-house here now starting in July 1st. There's this big house settlement that basically the future of N.I.L looks different when schools themselves start actually paying the players. Up until this point, I know there's a lot of wink on this, but up to this point, schools haven't paid players.
Right.
It's all officially. It's all come from N.I.L. It's come through collectives. It's been from the outside. And only that's been the last 5 years where that's been legal. Yeah. Above the table, for years, there's always been under the table things. Yeah. Well, now we've transitioned through N.I.L to this point where we are today, where schools start to pay and actually have it's $20.5 million is what it's starting off with, that schools will be able to pay all of their athletes, and how they decide and divvy that up is up to them. Not all schools, not all Division I schools even have football. So you go over to Omaha and we have Creighton University. They're, been real good in basketball. They have $20.5 million that they could hand out. Well, they don't have 105 football players. Yeah.
We have been talking about the fan aspect of this, the player aspect of this, and I think we could talk about those two forever. I do want to emphasize, I do feel bad for the coaches though. And I know they're making millions, don't get me wrong, but even as a high school coach, we don't have this whole money situation, but I just want to coach football. Like, just being 100% honest, I just want to continue coaching football. And part of this is there's pressure, there's outside noise, there's the expectations, most importantly, the politics that go behind who's coming where. Now we have transfers in high school as well. I mean, we had 6 transfers last year. So things like that, I can relate with the coaches. I can feel bad for them on that side of things. Because part of why I love to coach is not only because of the X's and O's. I get to pour into someone else's life and see that person grow. If I just have them for a year, I feel like my job is incomplete. So I can see that part.
Yeah, the money makes it worth it at that level. Yes. But that doesn't make it any easier on you look at the challenges that these coaches have, especially at the college level. Right now, the rules being as they are, you're never done recruiting your team.
No.
It's a 365-day-a-year recruiting job. And there are coaches, we've seen coaches that have Boston College's head coach a year ago left to go and be a coordinator for the Packers. Yep. That just from a lifestyle standpoint, it was like, well, get me into the pros and I can at least have a little bit of an off season. That's fair. The head or our offensive coordinator now, Dana Holgerson, was the head coach at Houston, and when he got fired there, he had 3 years of his contract was still being paid out. So what did he do this last year? He went and traveled. And I think we saw it was during one of the games.
For a little bit.
Yeah, he traveled, went like 30 places all around the globe over the last 10 months. And then finally, he's a football coach. Just like you're saying, you're a football coach. You just want to be around it. And, he couldn't even make it through a season. By the end of the season, he was
I'm ready
to get back in, to get back in. And it wasn't for the money. He was going to get that money whether he was coaching here or not. He was guaranteed that. He wanted to get back into coaching and being around the players and being around the coaches, and that's kind of the drug, so to speak, for those in the sport. And the pressure on them though is immense, and so I can see a lot of the burnout too that happens from it.
Yeah, Matt, before we go, if you had to explain, because whether it's Mexico or other Spanish-speaking countries that might see this, we don't have this type of atmosphere, specifically at the college level. If you had to explain what college sports, specifically college football, is like, and why Nebraska and this environment is so amazing. How would you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, college football, it's absolutely addicting. And your Saturdays from kickoff at 11 a.m. until midnight now, it's just nonstop. And the thing that has made college football so great is that it hits every single little corner of the country. The NFL, there's 32 teams, and if you're in those big markets, you're part of that. And if not, then your fans, a lot of Nebraska fans will like the Chiefs or the Broncos or somebody that's regional. College football, it's in all these states, and so everywhere you go, you just see the rivalries, you see the passions. We'll drive down and go to a football game in Oklahoma, and along the way, driving down there on a Friday, you'll pass Kansas State fans driving down the interstate to their game, and Kansas fans, and then Oklahoma State fans, and you just see it, and the passion, the pageantry, the history. I love Nebraska athletics and Nebraska and the state and the Huskers with everything in me, and yet there's nothing unique to that. I see the same thing when I talk to a Oklahoma fan, and the way they talk about their Sooners, or Texas talk about their Longhorns. It's unique and great in its own setting, and I'm happy to be part of it with Husker Nation, with Nebraska.
Yeah, I obviously love being a Husker. I love going to those games. I think that other countries are getting closer. I like that we are following stories now. We have rivalries now. So that just makes it more interesting.
Yes.
But of course, the type of shows and entertainment that the US is known for, whether it's a concert or any type of sporting event, specifically in this case football, I think that's what keeps people tuned, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what college football game is, or NFL game for that matter. I'm gonna turn it on because this is made to entertain me. Mm-hmm. And going to the stadium is a whole different the thing. Being there, seeing the fireworks, seeing the US anthem, and it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. So I think that's the special sauce, the secret sauce that other countries are trying to replicate.
Yeah, the in-game experience. I'm looking back here. Everyone's got a man cave with big screen TVs, and there are always going to be creature comforts of being able to sit home and watch a game on TV. But nothing beats being at the place.
The smell, the noise,
and being around, and when you have these great collective shared moments. This is what Nebraska football needs, by the way. We need that shit. We need to beat that Michigan next year, or Penn State, we need to have those big wins where you collectively as a fan base get together and you're celebrating. And back in the day, we'd tear down the goalposts and take them through, whatever it is. You have to have those moments as fan bases, and that's all part of the experience too. I'm excited to see the sport spread out the way. I wasn't as knowledgeable about what's going on like down in Mexico until I was starting to talk with you about that. And I love to see that the sport is growing the way it is.
And the Olympics will help.
The Olympics will help. Yeah. Watching the draft a couple weeks ago and just seeing, once they got past the first two rounds, then every single announcement was coming from someone from somewhere around the globe in places I wasn't necessarily expecting it to come from. I can remember the NFL Europe League 20 years ago, but now you're seeing it expand so much beyond just that. And so that will lead to so many advances too, I think, with the sport. And we've talked about that with the NFL playing in more places. That I'm curious to see what that will look like, all the other play that will come out. And then everyone has opportunities now. People have chances to get better coaching. 2% football. There's more opportunities for kids to grow and develop in the sport. Places like Huddle, where there's more opportunities for students to be able, or for players to get their video out there. That's the thing. Whether you were in the central part of Mexico or if you were in the central part of Nebraska, it would be really hard back in the day to get
your film out there,
to get seen. And Nebraska has a football player right now, Carter Nelson, that played 8-man football, and Nick Saban flew up there to go see him. And Saban said, "This is the first time I've ever been to an 8-man football game."
Yeah.
How does he get seen? It's because of the advancements, the technology that didn't exist. There's always been good players in all these different parts. There's always been good players, I'm sure, down in Mexico.
Yes.
From the second you guys have started. It's just getting that opportunity to be seen and then take the next step.
I guess I'm going to take a crazy path. or I guess tangent before we head out, but you said something super crucial. You said the collective experience. Right now, and this is more like psychology based, not sports based, but my generation and generations underneath mine are suffering from extreme loneliness. Like, and this is stats. This is not a feelings thing. Like, we have remote jobs. We have so much technology that allows us to connect with people from all around the world and whatever. So now people are spending way more time by themselves. They're watching the games on TVs. We're watching movies on streaming instead of going to the movie theaters. And they use Friends, the series Friends, as an example. Back then, if Friends was at 9 p.m., everyone was watching Friends. So if you would go to school the next day, you would ask people about, hey, what did you think about this part of the episode? Because you knew everyone was watching this. Now the algorithm is tailored to you and just what you like. So obviously I get a lot of football content on my algorithm, but you might get a lot of, I don't know, tennis or racquetball, whatever. So now this is a whole different conversation because we're not watching the same thing. So if you have 50,000, 90,000, 120,000 people in the same spot, living the same type of, you know, that adrenaline that's getting pumped through your veins as you watch your favorite team score a touchdown. Now that's special. That's a shared, meaningful experience.
That's such a good point. How special is college football and sports in general? How often do you watch live TV anymore? I mean, I know countless friends that during the off season they'll get rid of YouTube TV or whatever their service is. They'll get rid of it, and then they hit about August and they go, I got to get it. I have to bring it back for a couple of months. I can't live without this. I can live without live TV. I can live without live news. I can live without a whole lot of stuff. But sports and football
gets people together.
It gets people together, and you want to be there for it. You either want to watch it together, or if it's a home game, you want to be there, or if it's an away game, you want to take a trip and go and head out and do it too. And so those shared moments are important.
Well, Matt, I really appreciate you coming on. I love that conversation. I could go for a couple more hours for sure.
No, I appreciate it, Eddie. And I'm a huge fan of what you're doing. So
thank you. 2% Football appreciates you being here. So thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
See ya.